There are still places in our world that leave even modern experts stunned. Ancient structures too massive to explain, artifacts that seem out of time, and entire civilizations that rose brilliantly only to vanish without a trace. These aren't legends. These are real mysteries uncovered by archaeologists and historians. From colossal stone blocks modern machines struggle to lift, to forgotten cities buried deep beneath deserts and oceans, each discovery pushes the limits of what we think the ancient world could do. So get ready as we explore the secrets the past refused to leave behind. The giant handprint of Nevada Canyon. In the dry canyonlands of Nevada, where sandstone cliffs rise in layered walls and narrow passages cut through ancient desert rock, a photograph began circulating in the early 2000s, showing what appeared to be a gigantic human handprint pressed into the canyon face. The imprint, measuring far larger than a modern human hand, seemed moulded directly into hardened stone, as though an enormous being had pushed its fingers into the rock when it was soft mud millions of years ago. The image captured the public imagination immediately, and the site came to be known as the giant handprint of Nevada Canyon. But unlike many well-documented geological or archaeological sites in the American Southwest, this handprint has no formal excavation record, no published geological report, and no university study describing its formation. Instead, it exists primarily through photographs taken by hikers and explorers travelling through Nevada's remote canyons, areas known for unusual erosion forms, dramatic weathering, and rock surfaces that often mimic familiar shapes. Despite this, the sheer clarity of the imprint in some images has kept the mystery alive. The canyon stone where the handprint allegedly appears belongs mostly to Jurassic Age sandstone formations, similar to those found across Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. These rocks are known for producing natural shapes that resemble footprints, ripples, waves, and even biological forms. Over millions of years, wind erosion carves deep grooves and smooth channels. Water flow accentuates finger-like patterns, and the layering of sediment can break in ways that create organic-looking outlines. Many prints that look intentional can often be traced to these natural processes. The Nevada handprint fits within this geological behaviour. In most available photographs, the fingers are separated by vertical erosion channels, each carved along natural weaknesses in the sandstone. The palm appears to be a shallow depression created by softer sediment eroding faster than the surrounding rock. Together, these features create an illusion of a hand far larger than any human anatomy could produce. To geologists, it is an example of pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar forms in natural shapes. Yet the mystery persists because the formation is unusually symmetrical. The depressions align in a way that resembles the spacing of actual fingers, and the depth of the grooves varies just enough to suggest pressure rather than random erosion. In a landscape filled with jagged forms and chaotic weathering, the handprint looks deliberate. Even specialists who dismiss the idea of an actual print acknowledge the visual impact of the shape. The American Southwest has long been home to petroglyphs, pictographs, and rock carvings created by indigenous cultures such as the Paiute, Shoshone, and ancestral Pueblans. Many of these include hand motifs, positive and negative, prints made with pigment or carved into soft rock, but these are symbolic representations, not impressions left by actual hands. None approach the size of the Nevada Formation, and none are carved into such hard sandstone faces. For these reasons, the giant handprint is not considered part of the region's indigenous art traditions. Instead, the mystery reflects the landscape itself. The canyonlands produce natural formations that appear artificial, arches resembling windows, vertical pillars that resemble towers, balanced rocks perched on narrow stems, and strata that fracture into geometric shapes. The handprint is part of this geological illusion. It is compelling because it sits somewhere between pattern and randomness, distinct enough to look intentional, but consistent with natural erosion. The viral appeal of the formation also speaks to how digital images shape modern myth-making. A single striking photo, detached from its location, scale markers, or geological context, can generate a legend. As the image spread online, it accumulated interpretations, evidence of giants, remnants of ancient creatures, even impressions left by non-human beings. None of these claims are supported by scientific analysis, but they reflect the fascination people feel toward landscapes that seem to hold traces of something beyond ordinary human scale. Despite the lack of official documentation, the canyon where the formation appears is part of a region rich with paleontological history. Dinosaur footprints, trackways, and fossilized ripple marks exist throughout Nevada and Utah. These authentic prints show how sediment can capture and preserve impressions for millions of years. The giant handprint differs fundamentally. It shows no preserved biological detail, no texture patterns, and no deformation consistent with an actual organism stepping or pressing into soft sediment. Its depth, shape, and smooth edges indicate erosion rather than fossilization. Still, the formation highlights how powerful natural processes can mimic intention. The desert carves its own artwork, sometimes sharp, sometimes accidental, sometimes eerily anthropomorphic. Places like the Nevada canyons remind us that nature can produce shapes that feel deliberate, even when no human or giant hand was ever involved. The giant handprint of Nevada Canyon is not evidence of a forgotten species or lost civilization, but it is evidence of something else. The human tendency to search for meaning and stories in the landscape. We see ourselves reflected in stone, in shadows, in the patterns carved by wind and water. The canyon imprint endures not because it is a real fossil, but because it represents the boundary where geology and imagination meet. In the end, the formation is a geological curiosity, an evocative shape in an ancient desert, framed by red rock and silence. It reminds us that the world is full of forms that appear familiar, yet remain entirely natural, shaped by forces older and more powerful than human history. The Copper Age giant of Varna, along the western edge of the Black Sea, in modern Bulgaria, lies one of the most important prehistoric discoveries in Europe, a burial ground known as the Varna Necropolis. Unearthed in 1972 during routine construction, the site revealed more than 300 graves dating to around 4500 BCE, containing the oldest worked gold ever found. Among these burials, one skeleton immediately stood out, a remarkably tall and robust male whose grave held more gold than any other Copper Age burial in the world, creating a lasting debate over who he was and why he was buried with such unprecedented wealth. The necropolis belongs to a society far more advanced than expected for that period. While much of Europe was still dominated by simple farming villages, Varna was using complex metallurgy, long-distance trade routes, and carefully structured social hierarchy. The giant skeleton, catalogued as Burial 43, became a central symbol of this early complexity. He was significantly taller than the average male of his community, with strong bone density and large joint surfaces suggesting powerful physical development. Although his stature remained within the upper human range, it was unusual enough to stand out clearly among the surrounding remains. What made the burial even more striking was the amount of gold arranged around his body. Necklaces, bracelets, scepters, and hundreds of small adornments placed with deliberate patterning. Nearly 1 kilogram of gold was recovered from this single grave, making it the richest prehistoric burial in Europe and one of the earliest displays of concentrated wealth anywhere in the world. The gold objects were not crude, they were produced with sophisticated methods that required controlled heating, shaping, and polishing, skills that indicate a highly specialized class of artisans. The presence of such wealth reveals that Varna society had already developed social stratification long before the rise of formal kingdoms. Some burials contained no goods at all, while elite graves like Burial 43 displayed immense material power. Chemical analysis from other skeletons shows that high-status individuals consumed better diets, which may explain why the man in Burial 43 was larger and healthier than most of his community. His size was not evidence of a separate giant race, but of better nutrition, social privilege, and possibly selective breeding within an emerging elite. Varna's location at the crossroads of the Black Sea, Balkan Mountains, and inland trade routes made it a natural hub for exchange. Copper used in its tools and ornaments came from distant sources, and shells found in the graves originated from the Mediterranean. These materials show that Varna was connected to a wide network of early trade, which helped generate the wealth displayed in elite burials. The burial also included a ceremonial mace, a symbol that later appears across early civilizations as an emblem of leadership. Combined with the size of the skeleton and the extraordinary gold offerings, it suggests that this individual held an authoritative role within his society, perhaps a chief, a ritual leader, or the head of an early political hierarchy. His death appears to have triggered a highly organized ceremony involving carefully arranged ornaments and symbolic placement of objects. Varna also contains cenotaphs, graves filled with gold but without bodies. These symbolic burials show that the society valued roles and offices as much as individual people. Leadership may have been tied to spiritual identity and ceremonial authority rather than simple economic status. Burial 43 fits within this context, a physically imposing figure representing both real-world power and ritual significance. Despite its sophistication, the Varna culture collapsed around 4100 BCE, possibly due to climate stress, resource pressure, or shifting trade patterns. After its decline, the region saw waves of migration and cultural change, causing the memory of Varna's early achievements to disappear completely until the necropolis was rediscovered. Today, Burial 43 stands as the clearest evidence that Europe's first complex society emerged far earlier than once believed. Though no written history survives, the arrangement of his grave provides insight into social hierarchy, ceremonial life, and economic power. This single burial encapsulates a moment when human society took its first steps toward political leadership, crafted symbolism and inequality, traits normally associated with much later civilizations. The Copper Age giant of Varna was not a mythical being, but a real person whose physical presence, wealth, and symbolic authority reveal that the roots of European civilization stretched deeper and earlier than expected. His grave marks the beginning of organized leadership, metal craftsmanship, and social distinction on the continent. Long after his society disappeared, he remains the most powerful surviving voice of its existence, preserved not in written words but in gold, bone, and the precise way his community chose to honour him. The stone, Giant's Grave of Herbet Midras. In the rolling foothills of central Israel, inside a landscape shaped by limestone ridges, terraced fields, and small forest patches, lies a quiet archaeological zone known as Herbet Midras, a place where ancient tunnels, hidden chambers, and collapsed passageways have created one of the region's most intriguing subterranean mysteries. Among these underground features is a large stone burial chamber, often referred to as the Giant's Grave, a name inspired not by mythic beings, but by the unusual scale of the chamber and the complexity of the tunnels leading toward it. Herbet Midras has long been known for its network of underground refugees and burial caves spanning thousands of years of occupation. The site contains layers from the Second Temple period, remnants of early Christian settlements, and traces of Roman-era conflict. Yet beneath these historical phases lies a more enigmatic structure, an oversized burial chamber positioned within a collapsed tunnel system, suggesting that the original builders intended a monumental underground resting place concealed entirely from the surface. The chamber itself is carved into natural limestone using steady manual excavation techniques, with walls that expand beyond the proportions expected for typical regional burials. The size of the chamber raised questions from the moment it was first documented. It is significantly larger than a standard family tomb and lacks the familiar internal niches or ossuary placements common to many burial caves from the surrounding landscape. Instead, the room presents a broad single-space interior that looks more like a subterranean hall than a traditional burial cell. The approach to the chamber is equally unusual. Tunnels that lead toward it show signs of deliberate expansion and long-term use, but sections have collapsed, sealing off parts of the network and limiting access. These collapses appear to have occurred gradually over centuries as soft limestone ceilings weakened, yet the pattern suggests that the original structure once had a more stable design before environmental erosion and seismic activity altered it. Archaeologists studying the site have proposed that the chamber may have served an elite or ceremonial purpose, belonging to a high-status individual or community group that required a burial space not exposed on the surface. The hiding of the chamber beneath tunnels reflects a broader pattern seen across the Judean lowlands, where burial practices increasingly incorporated concealment during periods of conflict, particularly during the Roman occupation. However, the scale of this chamber goes beyond functional hiding and appears intentionally monumental. Artifacts recovered around the entrance tunnels include pottery fragments, oil lamp remains, and small personal items consistent with burial ritual activity, even though no single object definitively identifies the occupant. The absence of skeletal remains inside the central chamber may be due to ancient looting, movement of remains during later reuse, or the natural decay of organic material in an environment vulnerable to intrusion. The lack of direct physical remains has left the original occupant unidentified, contributing to the chamber's long-standing aura of mystery. This site also connects to a broader tradition of underground architecture in the region, where natural caves were expanded into multi-room complexes used for refuge, worship, and burial. Yet none of these typical functions fully explain the proportions of the giant's grave, which remain larger and more deliberate than standard domestic or refuge spaces. The chamber's design implies careful planning rather than gradual need-based expansion. Rock cut analysis shows that the chamber's builders used controlled chisel strokes to square the walls and enlarge the central space. Unlike smaller burial niches carved quickly into soft limestone, this chamber required sustained labour, organised work teams, and a long-term construction timeline. Such effort suggests that whoever commissioned it viewed the underground space as a significant ritual or symbolic project rather than a mere practical necessity. Some scholars proposed that the chamber was originally connected to a wider funerary complex, now lost due to collapse or erosion. Ancient quarrying marks in nearby hillsides indicate that stone extraction was once active in the region, meaning the chamber may have been part of a larger system now buried beneath soil layers and rockfall. This idea gained support from the discovery of adjacent passageways that appear to have once linked multiple underground rooms, though only fragments remain intact. Hirbet Midrash is also associated with Christian tradition through legends linking the site to early followers fleeing persecution, though these stories belong to later historical phases and do not explain the chamber's much earlier origins. Nevertheless, the reuse of the site across centuries reflects the enduring importance of the location within local memory and religious practice. Today, the giant's grave is accessible only through stabilised portions of the site, with archaeologists carefully documenting remaining tunnels to prevent further collapse. Modern imaging techniques have revealed gaps and voids beneath the current surface, suggesting that additional chambers may still lie undiscovered, filled with sediment or blocked by fallen stone. This supports the idea that the burial chamber visible today was once part of a more extensive subterranean network rather than an isolated construction. What makes the chamber so compelling is that it exists within a landscape rich with ordinary burials, yet it exceeds them all in size and complexity. This indicates a deliberate deviation from typical cultural norms, possibly reflecting a unique individual, a distinct ritual group, or a period of heightened symbolic expression within the community. No inscriptions remain to identify the builders, and no direct record explains why the chamber was placed beneath tunnels instead of being carved openly into a cliffside or above-ground monument. Its silence is its defining characteristic, a space built with care, hidden beneath the earth, and left without the written context that often accompanies monumental burials. The stone, Giant's Grave of Herbet Midrash, ultimately represents a mixture of archaeological evidence and unanswered questions. It stands as an example of how underground architecture can outlast the cultural memory that created it, leaving behind only the physical form and the incomplete trace of ritual activity. Its scale tells us that someone was meant to be honoured with extraordinary effort, yet the collapse of the surrounding tunnels erased the story before it could be carried forward. What survives today is the physical outline of that intention, an oversized chamber, a labyrinth of tunnels, and a reminder that even within landscapes filled with well-documented history, some constructions escape clear explanation, preserving mystery in the quiet spaces beneath the ground. The red-haired mummies of Taklamakan. Deep inside the Taklamakan desert of western China, one of the driest and most isolated regions on Earth, archaeologists discovered a group of naturally preserved mummies, unlike any previously found in East Asia. These individuals, buried thousands of years ago in the Tarim Basin, displayed striking physical features that seemed unexpected for their location. Tall stature, high bridged noses, deep-set eyes, and most famously, long red or light brown hair that was still intact after millennia of desiccation. The discovery began in the early 20th century, but systematic excavation took place much later, revealing hundreds of remarkably preserved bodies. Among the most famous is the so-called Beauty of Lulan, a woman whose skin, clothing, and hair survived nearly 3,800 years. Nearby burials included men, women, and children, whose appearance differed from the populations historically associated with early China, raising questions about ancient migration, cultural mixing, and the forgotten movements of people across Eurasia. The Tarim Basin was once a crossroads between mountains, deserts, and early trade routes. Though now harsh and nearly uninhabitable, the region was part of a broad network of ancient travel corridors, linking Central Asia, Siberia, India, and early steppe cultures. The mummies reveal that these corridors were active far earlier than the Silk Road, carrying people, technologies, and languages across enormous distances. The clothing found on the mummies is equally revealing. Many were buried wearing woven wool textiles, patterned in colours and designs similar to those found in Bronze Age Europe. Their garments included twill-woven cloaks, leather boots, felt hats, and elaborate belts. This level of textile craftsmanship suggests sophisticated weaving traditions, and the style closely parallels early European and Indo-European clothing traditions rather than those of East Asia. Grave goods provide further clues. Wooden wagons, cattle remains, horse gear, and woven baskets appear in several burials, indicating a mobile pastoralist lifestyle. Some of these artifacts are similar to those found in Andronovo and Afanasievo cultures of the Eurasian steppe, which existed far to the west during the same period. This has led many researchers to propose that early Indo-European speaking peoples may have migrated into the Tarim Basin long before written history documented their movements. Scientific studies have helped clarify the story. Early DNA analysis showed that these populations carried genetic markers linked to ancient Western Eurasian groups. Later, more detailed genomic research revealed a mixture of ancestries. Some individuals descended from early steppe herders, while others belonged to an even older and more isolated lineage connected to Ice Age Siberia. This combination produced a population that did not resemble any single known group, but instead represented a unique branch of early Eurasian diversity. The desert itself played a role in their preservation. With almost no humidity, intense heat in summer, and freezing conditions in winter, the Tarim Basin created a natural mummification environment. Bodies buried in shallow pits dried rapidly, preventing decay. As a result, facial features, hair, clothing fibres, and even eyelashes survived in detail rarely seen outside Egypt's dry tombs. The burials also followed distinctive rituals. At the Xiaohe Cemetery, for example, bodies were placed in coffin structures carved from entire tree trunks, shaped like overturned boats. Large wooden poles were planted near the graves, some decorated with symbolic carvings. Women were buried with wooden phallic objects, and men with symbolic representations of fertility or family lineage, suggesting a belief system centered on reproduction, continuity, and cosmic balance. Despite their appearance, the Tarim mummies were not evidence of a lost civilization or an advanced unknown culture. Instead, they represent early steppe migrants who adapted to desert life while maintaining traditions carried from distant homelands. Their existence shows that Eurasia was far more interconnected during the Bronze Age than previously assumed, long before the famous Silk Road formalized East-West exchange. Over centuries, these groups gradually merged with surrounding populations. Later burial sites show increasing signs of cultural blending, with elements of Central Asian, East Asian, and Indo-European traditions appearing together. Eventually, new waves of settlers entered the region, and the earlier groups lost distinct identity as the Tarim Basin evolved into a multicultural corridor. Today, the red-haired mummies of the Taklamakan hold significance not because they rewrite human history, but because they expand it. They show that migration was not a rare or exceptional event in prehistory. It was continuous. People moved across deserts, mountains, and grasslands, carrying languages, tools, and traditions from one end of Eurasia to the other. Their remains also challenged simplified ideas of identity. Ancient populations were not isolated or homogeneous. They were blended, dynamic, and constantly shifting. The Tarim Basin mummies proved that people who looked European lived deep inside Asia, thousands of years before modern nation-states or cultural boundaries existed. What survives of them today is a combination of preserved faces, textiles, tools, and genetic signatures that together reveal a culture that belonged both to the desert and to a wider world beyond it. They were travellers, herders, families, and ritual practitioners who built lives in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The red-haired mummies of Taklamakan stand as evidence of a forgotten chapter of human movement, reminding us that the world was connected long before recorded history began, and that every desert, mountain ridge, and forgotten valley may still hold stories of people who crossed its boundaries long before anyone wrote them down. The alien hands, mummies of Peru. High in the Andean foothills of southern Peru, where wind carves through dry valleys and ancient burial caves lie hidden within fractured cliffs, a series of unusual mummified remains surfaced in recent years and quickly captured worldwide attention. These remains included several desiccated hands that appeared to have 6, 7, or even 8 long fingers, sparking claims of non-human origins and creating one of the most debated archaeological stories in modern Peru. The hands were reportedly found in remote cave systems near the Nazca and Palpa region, an area already known for unusual ancient practices, extended burials, and natural mummification caused by extreme dryness. The remains were small, shriveled, and wrapped in clay-like material, with elongated digits that appeared far longer than typical human proportions. Their condition made them visually striking, especially when isolated from full skeletons, and photographs circulated widely before scientific analysis could be arranged. Local accounts suggested that the remains came from looted Andean burials, brought out of caves by informal diggers rather than archaeologists. This complicated research from the beginning because the hands lacked confirmed excavation records, burial context, or associated artifacts that would normally help identify cultural origin or date. Without controlled recovery, their interpretation became dependent on physical examination alone. Forensic specialists and anthropologists who studied images and samples pointed toward natural explanations. Many elongated fingers were revealed to be reorganized human bones. Phalanges and metacarpals rearranged into longer structures, sometimes combined with animal bones or wrapped in organic materials. This type of modification is consistent with what happens when looters reconstruct fragments for resale or display, creating objects that appear unusual but are not anatomically real. Some remains showed clear signs of having been altered after death. Joints did not align properly, bones belonged to individuals of different ages, and finger segments were longer than any natural human proportion would allow. In several cases, X-ray analysis showed repeated segments, meaning multiple bones from different parts of the body had been assembled to form a single elongated digit. Other samples, when tested, returned DNA consistent with ordinary human origin, though degraded by centuries of environmental exposure. Skin ridges and tissue patterns also matched standard human morphology, not the structures of any non-human species. These findings do not eliminate the cultural importance of the remains, but demonstrate that the alien hand interpretation did not hold up under anatomical examination. What remains intriguing is the cultural and geographical context. The Andean region contains burial traditions stretching back thousands of years, including practices of bandaging, reshaping, and symbolic modification. Artificial cranial elongation was common among several pre-Columbian societies, and some mortuary rituals involved reconstructing partial remains, preparing bodies for secondary burial, or assembling bones for ceremonial storage. In such settings, modified or rearranged bones could reflect ritual behavior rather than deception. The caves where these remains were reportedly found have long histories of natural and cultural mummification. Dry winds, mineral salts, and stable temperatures preserve organic tissue better than most environments. Many Andean mummies retain skin, hair, and clothing, making even small anatomical details appear strikingly lifelike. The elongated hands, even if reconstructed, reveal how easily unusual preservation and post-mortem alteration can create visually shocking remains that seem to defy biology. In the absence of complete bodies, their isolation from context makes them appear dramatically foreign. The controversy also highlights a larger problem in Andean archaeology: looting. Many mummies removed illegally from caves lose their historical context and become objects of speculation, making it difficult for science to reconstruct their cultural meaning. Without proper documentation, even real ancient modifications, whether ceremonial or medical, become impossible to interpret reliably. Despite sensational claims, the scientific consensus remains grounded. The hands do not represent a non-human species, nor evidence of unknown beings. Instead, they represent fragments of ancient human remains, altered through mix and match reconstruction, ritual modification, or later interference. Yet their story does not lose significance because of this. They illustrate how ancient mortuary traditions, environmental preservation, and modern misunderstandings intersect to create powerful myths. What the alien hands reveal most clearly is how fragile archaeological truth becomes when artifacts are removed from context. A single bone rearranged in isolation can spark global debate, while the larger cultural practices behind it remain overlooked. The remains point toward a complex Andean world where death, burial, and ritual transformation were treated with care, symbolism, and long tradition. The caves of southern Peru continue to hold many secrets, some genuine, some distorted by time, and some created by modern misinterpretation. The elongated hands belong to this layered story, not as evidence of extraterrestrial beings, but as an example of how easily visual anomalies can overshadow real human history. Even without mystery claims, the remains remind us that ancient cultures approached death in ways that challenge modern assumptions. Their practices, though misunderstood, speak to belief systems that valued transformation, preservation, and symbolic identity long before written records appeared. In the end, the alien hands mummies of Peru are less about what they appear to be at first glance, and more about what they reveal regarding the intersection of archaeology, rumour, and the human need to explain the unfamiliar. The blue-eyed mummies of Fayum. Southwest of Cairo, where the Nile Valley opens into the broad depression known as the Fayum Oasis, archaeologists uncovered one of the most remarkable intersections of Egyptian tradition and Greco-Roman culture. Here, between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, hundreds of mummies were buried with lifelike painted portraits placed over their faces, the now famous Fayum mummy portraits. Among them are individuals whose painted eyes appear impossibly vivid, blue, grey, green, looking out with a level of realism that feels unnerving in their clarity. Unlike typical Egyptian funerary masks, these portraits were painted on wooden panels in a style far more naturalistic than anything produced earlier along the Nile. They used shading, perspective, and lifelike anatomical detail, typical of classical painting rather than Egyptian symbolic art. When placed over mummified bodies, the effect is striking. The faces appear almost alive, staring forward with wide, glass-like eyes that seem to follow the viewer. These eyes are the most distinctive feature of the portraits. Artists painted them large and bright, using pigments mixed with beeswax in the encaustic technique. Blue or grey eyes did exist among the diverse populations of Roman Egypt, but in many portraits the colour is heightened for symbolic or stylistic effect. The wide-eyed look reflects a belief that the painted face served as the eternal identity of the deceased. Through the portrait, the individual continued to see, even in death. Some portraits exaggerate the gaze deliberately, giving the impression that the eyes are made of glass or inlaid stone, though they are entirely painted. Archaeologists initially found this unsettling because the realism contrasted sharply with the mummies' preserved bodies. In several excavations, portraits were still fixed over the skulls, and when unwrapped, the carefully painted blue eyes appeared directly above the empty sockets of the dried remains beneath. The people represented in these portraits belonged to a culturally mixed community. After Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, Greek settlers established new cities, and intermarriage with local Egyptians created a population blending Hellenistic and Egyptian traditions. Roman rule later expanded this mixture further. The Fayum portraits capture this diversity. Some faces show distinctly Egyptian features, others display Mediterranean or Anatolian traits. Many reflect a blend of both. Clothing and jewellery depicted in the portraits reveal high social status. Fine linen garments, gold wreaths, elaborate earrings, and Roman-style tunics appear frequently. These individuals likely belong to a prosperous class of landowners, merchants, and administrators who adopted Roman portraiture while retaining Egyptian mummification practices. This merging created a funerary ritual unlike anything else in the ancient world. The portraits also show signs of personal identity. Some depict children with large, solemn eyes. others young adults with carefully styled hair, and others mature men and women with subtle facial details like wrinkles or scars. This realism suggests that the portraits were painted during the individual's lifetimes, not after death, and kept in their homes before being placed on the mummy. Excavations at Hawara, Rubaiyat, and other Fayum sites reveal different burial types. Some bodies wrapped tightly with geometric patterns, others laid in wooden coffins decorated in Roman style. But in every case, the portrait served the same purpose: to bridge the living and the dead through a face that could be recognized eternally. The blue-eyed individuals have drawn the most attention because they appear visually unusual within an Egyptian context. Genetic studies show that Roman period Egypt had significant Mediterranean admixture, meaning lighter eye colours did exist, though likely at low frequency. Many blue or grey-eyed portraits, however, were probably artistic choices emphasising the clarity and purity of the afterlife gaze rather than literal representation. The haunting effect comes from the contrast between the fragile mummified remains and the remarkably preserved paintings. The bodies are often darkened, dried and tightly wrapped, yet the face above them is almost glowing with realism, creating the impression that the person is still present. This emotional immediacy is why the Fayum portraits are sometimes called the earliest true-to-life portraits in history. Despite their realism, the portraits eventually disappeared from Egyptian practice. By the 4th century CE, as Christianity spread and burial customs changed, the tradition faded. Many portraits were later removed from tombs during early excavations, separated from the mummies they originally belonged to, leaving their identities unknown. Today, the portraits survive in museums across the world, while the mummies remain mostly unstudied or fragmented. CT scans and forensic reconstructions have shown that the painted faces often match the real skull structures beneath, confirming that the artist intended to portray actual individuals, not idealized figures. The blue-eyed mummies of Fayum are significant not because they depict something supernatural, but because they reveal a moment in history when cultures blended so seamlessly that Egyptian embalming, Greek artistic skill, and Roman fashion merged into a single funerary expression. They show us faces from 2,000 years ago with a level of realism that feels immediate and human, reminding us that the people of the past looked at their world with the same intensity that we see in their portraits today. Their eyes, whether painted blue, brown or grey, were meant to remain open forever, watching over their families, their tombs, and eventually the modern world that would rediscover them. And though the bodies have dried and the names have vanished, their gaze remains one of the most powerful and enduring images from the ancient Mediterranean world, the Demon Stone of Rupkund. High in the Indian Himalayas, nearly 5,000 metres above sea level, lies one of the most isolated and haunting archaeological sites in South Asia. Rupkund Lake, a frozen crater known worldwide as Skeleton Lake, for the hundreds of human remains that appear each summer when the snow melts. While the lake itself has been studied extensively, far less attention is given to a large carved boulder located near the surrounding ridgeline, a weathered stone covered in markings that locals have long referred to as the Demon Stone. Its presence adds another layer of mystery to a site already known for unexplained deaths, extreme altitude, and ancient ritual roots. Rupkund's setting is harsh and unforgiving. The lake lies within a glacial basin surrounded by steep cliffs and narrow trails carved by shepherds and pilgrims over centuries. Human remains found around the lake date back more than 1,000 years, representing multiple groups of people who died in separate events, likely caught in sudden storms or severe hailfalls. Yet the carved stone that stands nearby does not seem directly connected to these tragedies. Instead, it appears to belong to an older cultural landscape connected to pilgrimage traditions, sacred geography, and mountain ritual zones. The so-called Demon Stone is a large, partially buried boulder with carved lines, faded symbols, and shallow engravings that appear geometric rather than textual. Its surface shows erosion consistent with centuries of exposure to extreme wind and ice. The carvings are not clear enough to read as script, but they follow deliberate patterns that suggest intentional design rather than natural cracking. Some lines form circular motifs, others create angular shapes, and a few resemble stylized figures or ritual markings often associated with Himalayan folk practices. Local oral traditions offer different explanations. Some communities say the stone marks the domain of mountain spirits or guardian deities that protect the surrounding peaks. Others speak of a demon defeated during an ancient mythic journey, with the stone placed as a symbolic boundary marker. The term demon stone comes not from archaeological classification, but from local storytelling, which blends myth, danger, and reverence in a landscape where human survival has always depended on respecting the mountain's unpredictability. Archaeologists examining the stone note that its carvings resemble those found along old pilgrimage routes leading toward Nanda Devi, a sacred peak in Uttarakhand worshipped for centuries. These routes often featured boundary stones, shrine markers, or symbolic waypoints that guided travellers through the harsh alpine terrain. The stone near Rupkund may have served such a function, warning, guiding, or invoking protection during a ritual journey rather than representing demonic imagery. The location of the stone supports this interpretation. It sits not beside the lake's edge, but along an elevated approach that ancient travellers would have used when performing the Nanda Devi Raj Jat, a pilgrimage spanning almost 3 weeks through some of the highest trails in the region. Rupkund lies directly on this route, and many scholars believe the lake served as a rest or ritual point for pilgrims. Placing a carved stone near such a dangerous pass would make sense within this cultural framework. The stone's carvings may also be linked to tantric or shamanic traditions practiced in remote Himalayan communities, where symbolic diagrams, sometimes misunderstood by outsiders, represented protective geometry, ritual boundaries, or cosmological maps. The angular shapes and circles carved into the stone resemble simplified mandala-like forms rather than occult symbols, as sometimes suggested in popular retellings. Despite these interpretations, the stone's exact origin remains unclear because no formal excavation has been conducted around it. Soil shifts, landslides, and glacial movement may have altered its position over centuries, and any artifacts that once accompanied it have likely been lost. The surrounding terrain is unstable, making detailed study difficult, and for much of the year the stone is inaccessible beneath snow. Its connection to the skeletons of Rupkund is symbolic rather than direct. Radiocarbon dating shows that the remains around the lake belong to at least 2 major time periods, one group from the 9th century and another from the 19th century. Genetic studies reveal that the individuals did not belong to a single population or event, but multiple journeys interrupted by sudden catastrophic weather. The demon stone predates at least some of these groups and seems unrelated to their deaths. What the stone truly reveals is the layered history of Rupkund. Before the lake became known for its mysterious skeletons, it was already part of a sacred landscape marked by ritual movement, boundary symbols, and cultural memory. The stone embodies that earlier layer of significance, a reminder that the mountains were not only feared, but also revered, navigated with symbolic markers long before scientific study arrived. Standing beside the stone today, the carvings are faint but unmistakable. They do not point to occult rituals or unknown beings, but to human attempts to understand, honour, and navigate a dangerous world. Like the skeletons themselves, the stone is a fragment of a larger story about pilgrimage, survival, and belief in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The demon stone of Rupkund remains mysterious not because it is supernatural, but because it is an isolated piece of a once living tradition now largely forgotten. Its meaning carved into cold Himalayan rock, survives as a quiet trace of the people who passed through these mountains long before their stories were recorded. The mysterious Sphinx of Hadar. Near the ancient city of Hadar in modern Afghanistan, archaeologists uncovered a statue that does not fit neatly into any known artistic lineage of South or Central Asia. Among the Buddhist monasteries, stupas, and sculptural workshops that flourished here nearly 2,000 years ago, one object stands out, a sphinx-like figure carved in stone, bearing a human head and a lion's body, yet created in a place where no established tradition of sphinx imagery existed. It is one of the most unusual artifacts from the ancient Buddhist world, raising questions about cultural exchange, artistic experimentation, and forgotten roots of influence. Hadar, located near Jalalabad, was once a major centre of Greco-Buddhist art, a fusion style that emerged after Alexander the Great's campaigns introduced Greek elements into Central Asia. In this region, sculptors blended Hellenistic features with Buddhist symbolism, producing statues in which Greek drapery folded across Indian poses and classical faces appeared on bodhisattvas and divine beings. The Sphinx of Hadar belongs to this world, but its form is unexpected even within this mixed tradition. The Sphinx shows a human head with stylized hair and a serene expression, similar to Hellenistic portraiture, while the lion's body is carved in a posture resembling guardian figures found at monastery entrances. The proportions are deliberate and symmetrical, indicating that the sculptor understood both anatomical structure and symbolic balance. Yet unlike Egyptian sphinxes, which were typically associated with kingship, or Greek sphinxes, which were tied to mythic riddles and guardianship, the Hadar Sphinx does not clearly match any established narrative from Buddhism or regional lore. Archaeologists propose that it may have been placed near a stupa or monastic gate, serving as a protective symbol or as an artistic experiment by craftsmen accustomed to blending motifs from multiple civilizations. The region's sculptors were known for their openness to new forms. They absorbed Greek, Persian, Indian, and Central Asian elements, shaping them into a hybrid style unique to Afghanistan's ancient monasteries. Within this context, the Sphinx may represent an imported artistic idea adapted into Buddhist architecture without retaining its original mythological meaning. Hadar's monasteries were connected to long-distance trade networks that stretched from the Mediterranean to northern India and China. Caravans travelling the Silk Road carried not only goods but stories, artistic models, and religious ideas. Greek coins, Roman glass, and Persian decorative motifs all reached Central Asia during this period. It is therefore plausible that an artist or patron encountered the Sphinx motif somewhere along these routes and commissioned a local sculptor to recreate it using regional craftsmanship. What makes the statue more mysterious is that it is nearly alone in its form. While winged creatures, lions, and hybrid guardian figures appear in Gandharan art, a true sphinx, human head, lion body, mythic composure is extremely rare. Very few similar examples exist across the wider Buddhist world. This isolation suggests that the Hadar Sphinx was not part of a repeated tradition, but a single creative event embedded within the broader swirl of ancient cultural exchange. The condition of the statue also reflects Hadar's turbulent history. Most of the site was destroyed or heavily damaged in the late 20th century due to conflict, looting, and collapse. Many sculptures survived only in museum archives or early excavation photographs. The Sphinx is one of the figures documented before the destruction of many monasteries, giving it heightened importance as a surviving witness to a cultural era that has largely vanished from the landscape. The facial features of the Sphinx show a gentle expression typical of Gandharan Buddhist art: soft eyes, smooth contours, and balanced proportions. Yet the lion body is carved with more forceful lines, muscular but stylized, reinforcing the guardian-like quality that such hybrid figures often carried in other ancient traditions. This combination of calm human face and protective animal strength reflects the artistic duality common in sacred architecture. Although sphinxes carried symbolic meaning in the Mediterranean world, guardianship, wisdom, liminality, the Hada Sphinx cannot be tied to any known Buddhist text or ritual. Instead, it seems to express the same artistic openness that allowed Greek Heracles to appear as Vajrapani in Gandharan art, or Greek vine motifs to decorate Buddhist reliquaries. It is part of the region's pattern of taking foreign imagery and giving it new, localized purpose. The statue also reveals how artistic exchange can survive even when written records do not. No manuscript from Hada explains why the Sphinx was created, yet its form demonstrates the presence of sculptors who were comfortable experimenting with motifs far outside their usual symbolic systems. It proves that ancient monasteries in Afghanistan were not culturally isolated, but deeply engaged in a global network of artistic communication. Today, the mysterious Sphinx of Hada stands as a reminder of a forgotten chapter when Buddhist monks, Greek-trained sculptors, Central Asian patrons, and travelling merchants interacted within the same environment. The statue reflects a world where artistic boundaries were porous, and where hybrid forms were not mistakes but expressions of cultural curiosity. Its mystery does not lie in supernatural origins or lost civilizations, but in the quiet fact that a single sculptor, working nearly 2,000 years ago in a Buddhist monastery at the edge of the Hindu Kush, chose to carve a symbol familiar in Greece and Egypt and place it in a religious context that never traditionally used it. It represents a moment when the ancient world briefly aligned in a way that allowed distant ideas to take new shape, leaving behind an artifact that feels both familiar and entirely unique. The Siberian Alien Antenna. In 1964, during a deep-sea research mission in the South Pacific, the American survey ship El Tanin captured a photograph of an object rising from the ocean floor, an object that did not look like a coral, plant, or geological formation. It appeared metallic, symmetrical, and mechanical, with a central stalk and regularly spaced crossbars, resembling a radio antenna planted on the seabed. The image later became known as the El Tanin antenna, one of the most debated underwater anomalies of the 20th century. The photograph was taken at a depth of nearly 4,000 meters, an environment where sunlight never reaches, temperatures remain close to freezing, and most life takes unusual forms. The object stood upright, its arms branching out at perfect intervals, creating the impression of an engineered device. For many who saw the image without scientific context, the shape seemed too regular to be natural. It appeared like something designed, placed, and functional. This impression was strengthened by the fact that the El Tanin mission was not an archaeological expedition but a geophysical one, focused on ocean currents, magnetic mapping, and seafloor sampling. When the image was first published in a scientific journal, it attracted little attention. But decades later, when the photo resurfaced in popular media, it was presented as possible evidence of an underwater artifact left by unknown intelligence. However, marine biologists recognized the form immediately. The antenna matched a deep-sea organism known as Chondrochanthus corymbiferus, a type of sea sponge whose branching pattern closely resembles metallic rods. These sponges anchor themselves to the seabed and extend upward to filter nutrients from the water. Their rigid silica structures can reflect light in ways that appear metallic in black and white underwater photography, especially when covered in sediment. Still, even with this explanation, the El Tanin image remained visually striking. The photographed specimen stands unusually tall and symmetrical, which amplified the idea of artificial design. Yet the ocean floor contains many such organisms, crinoids, glass sponges, and branching corals that develop geometric shapes due to water flow, mineral content, and evolutionary specialization. The seabed where the object was found lies along the Pacific-Antarctic Ridge, an active geological zone where volcanic activity and mineral-rich vents support unusual life forms. In these regions, sponges often grow in rigid tree-like patterns, and the absence of strong currents allows delicate structures to remain intact for decades or centuries. What fueled the alien antenna legend more than the image itself was the era in which it resurfaced. During the late 20th century, interest in unexplained phenomena was high, and deep-sea exploration was still limited. Many people had never seen the complex forms of deep benthic organisms, making the structure appear far more artificial than it would to specialists familiar with seafloor ecosystems. Another factor was the object's isolation. It stood alone in the Eltanin photograph, not surrounded by a colony of similar structures. This is unusual, but not impossible for sponges in resource-limited environments, where individual specimens can grow far apart depending on nutrient distribution and hard surfaces available for anchoring. The antenna also highlighted how limited our understanding of the deep ocean remains. More than 80% of the seafloor has still not been mapped or photographed at high resolution. In such unexplored environments, organisms frequently appear mechanical or geometric simply because evolution shapes them to maximize stability, filtration, or survival under extreme pressure. The Eltanin antenna also became a symbol of how easily images separated from context can transform into mystery. Without knowledge of deep-sea biology, the object appears mechanical. With that knowledge, it becomes recognizable as part of a larger ecological pattern. Yet the photograph still carries a sense of fascination. It represents a moment when science briefly brushed against the unknown before explanation settled in. In many ways, the object's story is less about what was found and more about how humans react to unfamiliar shapes. We tend to see intention in symmetry, intelligence in pattern, and design in geometry. The deeper the environment, the stronger the tendency to interpret unusual forms as artificial, because the deep ocean is one of the least familiar landscapes available to us. Today, the Eltanin antenna stands as a reminder that the ocean's depths produce structures that appear engineered, even though they emerge entirely from biological processes. It also reflects the fact that our planet still contains vast regions where life takes forms that challenge our expectations. The object was not a transmitter, relic, or constructed device. It was a deep-sea organism captured in a moment before its surroundings were fully understood. Yet its image remains powerful because it represents the boundary between mystery and explanation, where the unknown briefly takes a shape that feels deliberate. The Siberian alien antenna, despite its name, is not evidence of extraterrestrial technology, but it is evidence of something equally compelling, that the Earth's own deep oceans hold forms so strange that they can appear like artifacts from another world. The photograph continues to circulate not because it reveals alien engineering, but because it shows how unfamiliar the natural world still is, even in the age of satellites and deep-sea probes. The gigantic stone tools of Lake Makgadikgadi. In the dry heart of Botswana, where today the ground is a shimmering salt pan stretching across the horizon, Lake Makgadikgadi was once one of Africa's largest inland seas. Long before it evaporated into its present form, human populations lived around its shores, leaving behind tools, hearths, and traces of early habitation. Among these discoveries are a series of unusually large stone tools, axes, picks, and handheld implements so oversized that at first glance they resemble weapons built for giants rather than ordinary humans. These tools are typically several times larger than standard hand axes from the Stone Age. Some measure more than 30 centimeters long, with weights heavy enough that modern researchers struggle to swing them comfortably. Because of their size, they have often been presented in popular media as giants' tools, sparking speculation about who or what could have used them. but archaeological study paints a far more grounded, yet equally fascinating picture. The tools belong to the Acheulean tradition, a stone tool culture associated with early human species such as Homo erectus and later archaic Homo sapiens. Acheulean tools are known for their characteristic teardrop or oval shapes, created through careful flaking of stone cores. At Magadik Gadi, the abundance of large and high-quality rock sources allowed early tool makers to produce instruments far bigger than those typically made in other regions. The size of these tools suggests they were not intended for light daily tasks. Instead, they may have been used for heavy-duty activities such as butchering large animals, chopping wood, processing plant materials, or breaking open bones for marrow. Their mass allowed force to be delivered through gravity-assisted blows, meaning they were more like held and dropped implements than objects swung repeatedly in the hand. Another interpretation is that some oversized tools served as core tools, where the main purpose was not the tool itself, but the removal of sharp flakes from its surface. These flakes were then used as smaller cutting implements. Many of the giant tools show flake scars consistent with this process, meaning the large object acted like a portable quarry rather than a finished tool. The distribution of these tools around the ancient lakeshore indicates that early humans repeatedly occupied the Magadik Gadi basin during wetter climatic periods. At those times, the region was rich with game animals, freshwater resources, and plant life. Archaeologists have identified hearths, butchering sites, and clusters of tools suggesting that hunter-gatherer groups made repeated use of the same favourable areas over thousands of years. The heavy tools also reveal something about the people who made them. Early human species such as Homo erectus possessed robust builds and strong musculature, allowing them to handle heavier implements than modern humans might comfortably use. The tools were large, but they were proportionate to the physical capabilities of the species that created them. They are not evidence of giants. They are evidence of powerful hominins adapting tools to specific environmental demands. Some tools found in Botswana and across southern Africa even exceed the sizes found at Magadik Gadi, showing that oversized stone tools were a recognised part of Acheulean technology. Their presence across vast geographical regions, East Africa, Southern Africa, and parts of the Middle East, indicates that early humans systematically created large implements wherever suitable stone was available. Excavations around Magadik Gadi have also uncovered smaller tools and flakes that were clearly used by the same populations. This mixture of small and giant implements suggests a multi-purpose toolkit rather than a culture defined by oversized weapons. The large axes and picks served practical roles within a broader technological system shaped by environmental conditions. The landscape around the former lake helps explain why such tools were created. As water levels fluctuated over millennia, early humans adapted to cycles of abundance and scarcity. When the lake shrank, large grazing animals concentrated around remaining water sources, creating ideal conditions for hunting and butchering. Heavy tools would have been valuable for processing large carcasses quickly before scavengers arrived. Environmental studies show that early hominins lived in this region during periods when the climate was far wetter, supporting grasslands, rivers, and woodlands. The large tools therefore reflect the scale of available resources and the physical demands of the tasks these early humans faced. Today, the Magadik Gadi pans seem barren and lifeless, but the stone tools preserved in their salt-crusted surface reveal a very different world, one where early humans thrived around a massive lake, moving across shorelines that no longer exist, leaving behind evidence of a way of life shaped by strength, adaptation, and ingenuity. The gigantic stone tools are not anomalies or relics of a lost civilization. They are part of a long technological tradition that stretched across Africa for more than 1 million years. Their scale challenges modern expectations because we imagine ancient humans as physically identical to ourselves. But early hominins were built differently, lived differently, and solved problems with the materials and bodies they had. What makes the Magadi tools remarkable is not their size alone, but the glimpse they offer into the minds of early humans, people who understood their environment with an intimacy we can barely imagine. Each oversized tool tells a story of adaptation to landscape, to prey, to climate, and to the evolving needs of the group. Across the salt pan today, the wind moves over a landscape that once supported thriving human life. The giant tools remain as silent evidence of that ancient world, shaped by hands that were not giant, but strong, capable, and deeply attuned to survival. The Black Sarcophagus of Alexandria. In 2018, during a construction survey in the modern city of Alexandria, workers uncovered a massive stone sarcophagus buried deep beneath centuries of urban layers. The container was unusual even before it was opened. It was carved from dark granite, weighed well over 20 tons, and was completely unmarked. No names, no inscriptions, no carvings, nothing to identify who was inside. Its size suggested elite burial, yet the absence of decoration contradicted expectations. Almost immediately, the find became known as the Black Sarcophagus of Alexandria, and global speculation began long before archaeologists reached its interior. The sarcophagus lay more than 5 meters underground, sealed by a thick layer of mortar that had not been touched since the Roman period. After careful removal of the lid, archaeologists discovered not a single occupant, but 3 human skeletons inside. The bones were badly degraded, and the interior was filled with a foul-smelling reddish liquid, a mixture of groundwater, sewage infiltration, and dissolved organic materials. To the untrained eye, the bodies appeared melted or liquefied, adding to the mystery and fueling sensational interpretations online. Scientific analysis, however, revealed a more grounded explanation. The sarcophagus had been flooded repeatedly over centuries by contaminated groundwater. When water seeps into a sealed burial at high pressure, it can displace tissues, dissolve soft material, and scatter bones. This process, combined with anaerobic decay, creates the appearance of melted remains. The reddish colour came from rust and mineral deposits mixing with decomposed organic matter, not from anything unusual. Despite these explanations, the burial still raised questions. Why was such a massive sarcophagus left without any identifying marks? And why were 3 individuals placed together in a container normally reserved for a single elite occupant? Examination of the bones revealed that the individuals were likely adult males. One skeleton showed a severe cranial injury, a healed arrow wound, suggesting a life of military service or violent conflict. Another showed signs of advanced degeneration in the spine, consistent with heavy physical labour or long-term armour wear. The third skeleton displayed fewer injuries but similar age range. These clues suggest that the 3 men may have been connected by occupation or status, perhaps soldiers or officers serving under a shared command. The sheer size of the sarcophagus suggests that it was commissioned for someone of considerable status, yet circumstances may have forced a multi-person burial. Rapid death, battlefield casualties, or a political crisis where standard funerary rites could not be performed individually. Alexandria, during the late Ptolemaic and Roman periods, witnessed numerous episodes of instability, from civil wars to violent uprisings, any of which could have produced such circumstances. The absence of inscriptions could reflect haste rather than anonymity. Granite carving is labour-intensive. In a moment of emergency, decoration may have been abandoned in favour of simple interment. The sarcophagus itself, however, still required immense resources to create and transport, showing that even in haste, significant investment was made. Another possibility is that the sarcophagus had been reused. In ancient Egypt and Roman Egypt, it was not uncommon for older tombs to be repurposed, especially during periods of social disorder. a large but unfinished sarcophagus might have been available and quickly adapted for multiple burials. The location of the discovery also holds meaning. The sarcophagus was found in an area once filled with elite residences and administrative buildings during the Roman period. This suggests that whoever was buried here belonged to a high-ranking group, whether military or civic, yet the lack of grave goods, inscriptions, or symbols creates an interpretive gap that cannot be filled by archaeology alone. What remains most striking about the black sarcophagus is the contrast between expectation and reality. For months, media speculation imagined supernatural, royal, or historically famous occupants. Instead, archaeologists found three ordinary but physically hardened men whose identities were erased by time, circumstance, and environmental decay. Their story is not less significant because it lacks grandeur. It reflects the lived complexity of a city shaped by conquest, migration, and constant political change. Alexandria was a melting pot of cultures: Greek, Egyptian, Roman, Jewish, Nabatean, and its burial practices often reflected this mixture. Lavish tombs stood beside simple interments. Names could be carved in marble or left unmarked. People in high-status neighbourhoods might still die anonymously during chaotic periods. The black sarcophagus captures this ambiguity of ancient urban life, wealth and anonymity coexisting in the same story. Today, the sarcophagus and its contents remain important for understanding the Roman-era city. The bones offer clues about diet, physical stress and violence. The sarcophagus itself demonstrates continued use of monumental stone craftsmanship long after the pharaonic tradition declined, and the unmarked burial reminds us how much of Alexandria's human history lies beneath modern streets, compressed by time and rebuilt repeatedly until its stories became almost unreachable. The mystery of the melted bodies is resolved scientifically, yet the deeper mystery of identity remains open. We know how these men died and how their remains decayed, but not who they were, why they were buried together, or why their tomb was left unmarked. Their lives have vanished, leaving only the physical outline of an event that occurred 2,000 years ago. The black sarcophagus of Alexandria stands as a reminder that archaeology often uncovers lives not of famous rulers, but of unknown individuals whose stories are no less complex simply because their names were lost. In a city once filled with scholars, conquerors, and kings, it is the silence of these three men, buried together in a massive granite coffin, that captures the enduring mystery of the ancient world. The dog. Spacesuit figurines. Across northern Japan, especially in the Tohoku and Hokkaido regions, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of small clay figurines known as dogu, created during the Jomon period between 14,000 and 300 BCE. These figures, often stylized and abstract, were part of ritual life for one of the world's oldest hunter-gatherer cultures. Among them are a few rare examples that appear dramatically unusual: large-eyed, armoured-looking figurines that resemble beings wearing goggles, helmets, or even something like a modern pressure suit. These specific forms sparked decades of speculation and are now popularly called the spacesuit dog. The most famous of these figurines is the Shokoki dog, characterized by enormous almond-shaped eyes that wrap across the face like protective lenses. The head is rounded and helmet-like, and the body is covered with intricate patterns that resemble layered clothing, seals, or jointed plates. To modern viewers, accustomed to images of astronauts and technology, the resemblance to a visor and suit is immediate, but within the archaeological context of Japan, the imagery reflects symbolic traditions rather than science fiction origins. Dogu figurines vary widely in form. Some appear feminine, some appear animal-like, others are highly abstract, yet they share certain recurring features: swelling bodies, exaggerated joints, and surface patterns indicating textiles or ritual designs. Many show signs of intentional breaking, suggesting they were used in healing rituals, fertility rites, or spiritual ceremonies in which symbolic damage or transformation was part of the practice. The large eyes of the space-suit dog are not goggles, but stylized representations derived from Jomon decorative traditions. They may represent closed eyes during trance, protective spiritual masks, or an emphasis on seeing beyond the physical world. The patterns that look like articulated armor are likely depictions of elaborate clothing or tattoo-like designs common in Jomon culture, though their exact meaning remains unknown because the Jomon people left no written records. What makes these figurines striking is their level of abstraction. The Jomon people created one of the earliest ceramic traditions in the world, and their art focused heavily on symbolic rather than realistic forms. The suit-like appearance reflects an artistic logic that emphasized power, transformation, and the boundary between human and supernatural realms. Clay figures often embodied spirits, ancestors, or ritual roles rather than literal human beings. Archaeologists note that the dog with goggle-like eyes appear predominantly late in the Jomon period, during a time of social change, environmental stress, and heightened ritual complexity. This shift towards more elaborate figurines may reflect a society responding to new challenges through intensified spiritual expression. The designs may have symbolized protection, vision, or shamanic connection, concepts that could easily be misinterpreted as technology when viewed through a modern lens. Speculation about spacesuits emerged in the 20th century when photos of Dogu figurines circulated outside archaeological literature. Their unusual shapes became fodder for alternative history interpretations, especially during the era when ancient astronaut theories were popularized. The absence of written texts from the Jomon people allowed imaginative narratives to fill the gaps, though scientific analysis finds no evidence of extraterrestrial influence or advanced technology. Instead, the Dogo revealed the complexity of a prehistoric culture that developed sophisticated symbolic art long before agriculture spread widely through Japan. The figurines show careful craftsmanship with fine clay modelling, detailed incisions, and firing techniques that required skill and control. Each figure likely served a specific ritual purpose, invoking fertility, healing illness, protecting hunters, or mediating between the living and spiritual worlds. The humanoid shape of Dogu may also reflect the concept of transformation central to many ancient shamanic traditions. Figures often have exaggerated limbs or joint patterns that emphasize flexibility and change, suggesting beings shifting between human and supernatural states. The spacesuit Dogu fit within this broader symbolic vocabulary, representing not literal suits but metaphors for altered identity or spiritual protection. Even though there is no evidence of technology in these figurines, the mystery remains compelling because the Jomon culture itself is still not fully understood. They lived in settled villages thousands of years before agriculture became dominant, created some of the oldest pottery in human history, and invested significant effort into ritual life without leaving written explanation. Their artistic vocabulary remains enigmatic, and the dog are among the clearest windows into their belief system. Today, the space suit dog remains some of the most iconic artifacts from prehistoric Japan. They reflect a worldview where humans, animals, and spirits interacted constantly, and where ritual objects carried power beyond their physical forms. Their unusual shapes challenge modern assumptions about prehistoric art by showing that even early hunter-gatherers produced symbolic objects far more abstract and imaginative than simple realism. The Dogue do not point to ancient astronauts, but they do point to a culture deeply engaged in symbolic thought, ritual performance, and artistic experimentation. Their forms, however strange they appear to modern eyes, represent a sophisticated spiritual language that has yet to be fully decoded. The mystery of the dog lies not in extraterrestrial origins, but in the depth of human imagination at a time when the world was far simpler materially, yet profoundly complex spiritually. The ancient laser cuts of Pumapunku. On a high plateau in the Bolivian Andes, at nearly 4,000 metres above sea level, lies one of the most debated archaeological sites in South America, Pumapunku, a shattered complex of massive stone platforms and scattered megaliths built by the Tiwanaku civilization more than 1,000 years ago. What makes Pumapunku extraordinary is not simply its scale, but the precision of its stonework. Cuts, angles, and surfaces so sharply defined that they appear machine-made, leading to claims of ancient laser cutting or advanced tools unknown to historical records. The stones at Pumapunku include massive andesite blocks, some weighing more than 100 tons, and intricately carved H-shaped modules that once fit together in complex interlocking patterns. Many surfaces display straight edges, perfect right angles, and drilled holes that look unnervingly exact. These features stand out because andesite is a very hard volcanic stone, far more difficult to shape than limestone or sandstone. Yet the Tiwanaku builders produced clean, flat planes and crisp internal corners that seem far beyond typical Stone Age chiselling. Archaeologists studying the site note that the precision does not require advanced machinery to explain, but it does demonstrate an exceptionally high level of skill. The builders likely used hammerstones, abrasives, copper or bronze tools, and controlled pecking techniques combined with polishing. By repeatedly striking and grinding the stone, they achieved surfaces that today appear almost machined. This process was slow and labour-intensive, but entirely feasible with determination, planning, and generations of refined technique. The laser cut appearance is most prominent on edges where straight grooves run along the sides of blocks or around internal cutouts. These grooves were shaped using repeated linear incisions, possibly with a straight guiding tool, making the cuts appear mechanically uniform. Experiments with stone carving teams have shown that andesite can indeed be shaped to smooth precision using hand tools alone, especially when sand abrasion is applied. Despite these explanations, the level of uniformity still raises questions about methods. Some blocks show internal angles so sharp that modern stoneworkers consider them difficult without metal saws. Others display near-perfect symmetry in recessed slots designed to interlock with neighbouring stones. The Tiwanaku engineers appear to have approached construction with a modular mindset, producing standardised blocks that could fit together like architectural components. This modular design suggests a sophisticated understanding of geometry and load distribution. Pumapunku's platforms were built to resist earthquakes and extreme weather, with interlocking stones functioning like a three-dimensional puzzle that distributes force efficiently. The precision was not aesthetic alone, it was structural. The site's destruction adds to the mystery. Many blocks lie scattered and overturned, likely the result of seismic activity, looting, and centuries of stone removal. This fragmentation makes it difficult to reconstruct the original building plan, and the unusual shapes of the blocks invite speculation about how the complex once appeared when intact. Archaeological evidence shows that the Tiwanaku civilization possessed advanced agricultural systems, canal networks, and monumental architecture. They were fully capable of organising large labour forces, and their mastery of stonework reflects long-term experimentation and refinement rather than unknown technology. Yet the absence of written records leaves many questions unanswered about how they planned and executed their most precise constructions. The precision of Pumapunku often appears more mysterious because it is viewed out of context. Many ancient cultures achieved astonishing stonework: Egyptian granite statues, Inca polygonal masonry, Nabatean water channels carved into sandstone. What makes Pumapunku unique is the combination of hardness of material, sharpness of angles, and modular complexity. Some researchers propose that metal tools with hardened cutting edges, perhaps using arsenical bronze or copper alloys, played a larger role than previously assumed. Others suggest that abrasive cords or saws made from plant fibres combined with sand could achieve the fine linear cuts observed. Several experimental archaeologists have successfully replicated similar cuts using only hand tools and patience, demonstrating that the appearance of machine precision does not necessarily imply machinery. The laser cut interpretation persists largely because the stones look modern in their clarity, and modern perception associates crisp geometry with industrial technology. Yet geometry itself is not technology. It is planning, measurement, and controlled effort. The Tiwanaku people possessed all three. The cultural purpose of Pumapunku also remains partly unclear. It was connected to the larger Tiwanaku ceremonial centre, possibly serving as a ritual gateway or symbolic origin point within their cosmology. Its orientation aligns with significant solar and cardinal markers, indicating astronomical awareness integrated into its construction. The mystery, then, is not whether lasers or machines were used. They were not, but how a pre-industrial society achieved such high precision at a challenging altitude with limited tool materials. The answer lies in cumulative skill, organised labour, and a worldview that placed enormous cultural value on exactness and monumental permanence. Today, Pumapunku's shattered blocks remain among the most visually arresting artefacts of ancient engineering. Their clean lines and impossible seeming angles challenge modern expectations of what pre-industrial architecture should look like. They demonstrate that ancient builders were capable of extraordinary achievements through knowledge rather than technology, through patience rather than machinery. The ancient laser cuts of Pumapunku remind us that precision is not exclusive to the modern world. It can emerge wherever human beings commit time, intellect, and cultural meaning to the act of shaping stone, even at the roof of the world, long before machines ever existed. The Red Deer Cave. People. In the limestone mountains of southwest China, archaeologists uncovered remains that did not resemble any known population from the late Stone Age. Found in Maludong, Red Deer Cave, and nearby Longlin Cave, these fossils displayed a combination of traits so unusual that researchers initially could not place them within modern human groups. The individuals lived roughly 14,000 to 11,000 years ago, long after Homo sapiens had spread across the world, yet their skulls, jaws, and bones looked far more ancient. This population is now known as the Red Deer Cave people, one of the most mysterious human lineages discovered in recent decades. The fossils were first uncovered in the 1980s, but their significance became clear only in the 2000s, when detailed studies revealed their unusual anatomy. Their skulls were thick and rounded like early Homo species, with low foreheads, broad faces, and wide cheekbones. Their jaws lacked a modern-style chin, a feature common in much older human relatives, yet their brain size fell within the range of modern humans. This mixture of primitive and modern traits created a puzzle. How could such ancient features survive until the very end of the Ice Age? One of the caves contained evidence of hearths and large bones from red deer, suggesting the inhabitants hunted and cooked them. This detail gave the group its name, the Red Deer Cave. People lived during a period when agriculture was beginning in parts of China, yet they appear to have maintained a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Their tools were simple and lacked the finesse of contemporary cultures in nearby regions. The most surprising aspect was their survival date. By 14,000 years ago, most archaic human species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others, had disappeared. Everywhere else, the fossil record shows only Homo sapiens. Yet in these Chinese caves, a population persisted with distinctly non-modern traits, raising the possibility that they represented a late surviving archaic species or a hybrid lineage mixing ancient humans with early modern migrants. genetic testing has been difficult because the warm, humid environment damaged DNA. However, recent partial analyses of a red deer cave skull suggest that the individual belonged to the modern human lineage, though not closely related to present-day East Asians. This complicates the puzzle even further. They were biologically modern in genetic terms, yet morphologically closer to ancient humans that existed hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Some researchers propose that these features represent a relic population, groups of early Homo sapiens who left Africa before the main migration and retained more primitive traits. Others suggest hybridization between modern humans and archaic species such as Denisovans, who are known to have lived in Asia. A third view is that they were simply an isolated, highly variable population whose unusual skull shapes do not require a separate species designation. Whatever their classification, the fossils reveal that human diversity at the end of the Ice Age was far more complex than once believed. East Asia was not occupied by a single uniform population, but by multiple groups with different ancestries and lifestyles. The Red Deer Cave, people lived at the same time as fully modern humans in China, yet their bodies preserved deep echoes of earlier evolutionary stages. The mystery deepens when considering their disappearance. There is no evidence of conflict or sudden catastrophe. Instead, the Red Deer Cave people seem to fade from the archaeological record shortly after 11,000 years ago, around the time when climate warming transformed the region's ecosystems. As forests expanded and new resources appeared, more advanced human groups may have entered the region, gradually absorbing or replacing the older population. Their unusual appearance also shows how misleading the idea of a straight evolutionary line can be. Human evolution did not move smoothly from primitive to modern. It was branching, overlapping, and regionally diverse. The Red Deer Cave people represent one of those side branches, visible just briefly before vanishing completely. Another remarkable aspect is that these fossils challenge the assumption that all non-modern humans had disappeared long before the Holocene began. Their existence suggests the possibility that other undiscovered populations may have survived in remote regions even later, leaving only faint traces or none at all. Today, the Red Deer Cave people remain one of the least understood groups in human history. Their skulls show ancient traits. Their dating shows surprisingly recent survival, their DNA hints at modern connections, and their disappearance leaves no clear narrative. They stand at the crossroads of anthropology, forcing scientists to reconsider how many distinct human lineages shared the world at the end of the Pleistocene. The caves of Yunnan and Guangxi preserve their memory not through complete skeletons or tools, but through the enduring question of who they really were. The Red Deer Cave, people remind us that humanity's past is still incomplete, and that even in a well-studied era, whole populations can remain hidden in the shadows of the archaeological record, unknown until a few fragments of bone bring them suddenly into view. Trophy head with cleft lip, revealing ancient Andean attitudes. High in the dry valleys of the central Andes, where steep mountains shelter ancient settlements and ceremonial centres, archaeologists uncovered a human head preserved through a combination of ritual treatment and natural desiccation. The head bore a clearly visible cleft lip, making it one of the very few known trophy heads in the ancient Americas displaying a congenital condition. Its discovery opened a small but powerful window into how ancient Andean societies viewed physical difference, identity, and the symbolic meaning of the human body. Trophy heads were a known part of Andean ritual life for thousands of years. Cultures from the Nazca to the Wari performed ceremonial decapitation, sometimes of enemies, sometimes of revered individuals, and sometimes as part of complex religious cycles involving fertility, renewal, and the communication between worlds. These heads were not treated as simple war trophies, but as potent symbols believed to contain spiritual power. Their mouths were often sealed, their skulls drilled, and cords threaded through them to prepare the remains for display, burial, or ritual performance. The cleft-lip trophy head was discovered in a burial context, preserved with purposeful modification. The lips were stitched, the cranial vault had been altered, and the facial tissues showed careful preparation. Its condition indicated that the person was intentionally preserved after death and not simply taken from a battlefield. What makes the head exceptional is the facial deformity. Instead of hiding or smoothing it, the ancient practitioners left the cleft clearly visible, suggesting it held no stigma within the ritual context. In many ancient societies, visible congenital differences could carry symbolic meaning. Some cultures viewed them as signs of blessing, curse, spiritual connection, or unique identity. But in the Andes, the archaeological record rarely shows evidence of discrimination against individuals with congenital features. The presence of the cleft lip on a ritual object, used in ceremonies involving power, communication with the supernatural, or ancestral veneration, suggests that the condition did not diminish the individual's symbolic value. It may have enhanced it. The head belonged to a young adult male, and cranial analysis indicates he may have been healthy aside from the cleft lip. The condition would have affected his speech and appearance, but not his physical strength. Whether he was sacrificed, executed, or honoured in ritual is unclear, but the careful preparation suggests his death served a ceremonial purpose rather than a violent conflict. Some Andean cultures selected individuals for offerings precisely because of unique traits, believing that liminal bodies, those that did not fit perfect symmetry, held special significance in communicating with the spiritual world. The cleft lip may also reflect how the Andean worldview embraced diversity of form. Many Andean textile and ceramic motifs depict asymmetry, duality, and transformation. Physical variation was often woven into mythic narratives where beings could exist between categories, representing liminal or transitional states. The trophy head's features may have aligned with these symbolic ideas. Trophy heads also played roles in agricultural cycles. In the Nazca culture, for example, they were associated with fertility, rain rituals, and the renewal of plant life. In the central Andes, similar patterns appear: decapitated heads, buried near fields, incorporated into shrine offerings, or used in ceremonies marking seasonal changes. The cleft lip individual may have been part of such a practice, where the symbolism of the head, its individuality, its preserved expression, carried meaning beyond the physical. The discovery also sheds light on social attitudes. Many cultures in the world historically marginalised people with congenital anomalies, yet the treatment of this individual suggests acceptance or reverence rather than exclusion. The meticulous preparation shows he was not considered an outsider. If anything, he was given a central role in ritual after death. This challenges assumptions about ancient societies being uniformly harsh toward visible differences. Another layer of mystery involves identity. Was the cleft lip individual a member of the local community, offered voluntarily or ceremonially? Or was he an outsider, captured and ritually transformed? The evidence leans toward local origin. Isotopic analysis suggests he grew up near the region where he was buried, consuming the same food and water as the surrounding population. This makes it more likely he was part of the community's social fabric, chosen for ritual significance rather than defeated in conflict. The stitching of the lips, a common practice in Andean trophy heads, symbolized silencing the dead or preventing their spirit from escaping prematurely. It also marked the transition from human body to ritual object. The cleft lip did not interfere with this process. It remained visible as part of the preserved identity of the individual, showing that ritual meaning did not depend on physical symmetry. Today, the trophy head with a cleft lip stands as a quiet reminder that ancient societies understood physical difference with nuance. It reveals that the Andean world, with its complex spiritual systems and symbolic cosmology, recognized individuality even within ritual death. The head shows that people who looked different were not hidden away, but could be integrated into the most important symbolic practices of their time. Rather than telling a story of deformity, the fossil reveals a story of continuity, a person whose unique appearance became part of the ceremonial landscape of the Andes, preserved not as an object of shame, but as an object of meaning. The find challenges modern assumptions and enriches our understanding of how ancient people perceived identity, community, and the human body. The Atacama Giant geoglyph. Across the barren expanse of northern Chile, in one of the driest deserts on Earth, a colossal human-like figure stretches across the slope of a remote hillside. Measuring nearly 390 feet long, the Atacama Giant is the largest ancient anthropomorphic geoglyph in the world. Carved into the earth by removing the dark desert stones to expose lighter soil beneath, the figure stands alone in an empty landscape of wind, silence, and harsh sun. For centuries, it has watched over a corridor that once connected coastal communities, highland caravans, and early trade routes through the Atacama Desert. The Atacama Giant belongs to the tradition of geoglyph making practiced across the region by pre-Columbian cultures between 600 and 1500 CE. Hundreds of geoglyphs, animals, geometric shapes, lines, and human figures dot the desert slopes, forming one of the largest collections of earthworks in the ancient world. Among these, the Atacama Giant is the most striking. Its rectangular head, elongated limbs, and geometrically stylized body immediately set it apart from other figures. Unlike the curved shapes of the Nazca lines in Peru, the Atacama Giant is angular and rigid, almost schematic, as though designed using a system of measured proportions. Researchers believe the geoglyph served as a celestial marker, helping track the movements of the sun, moon, and important seasonal cycles. The head of the figure includes linear shapes and projections that may have acted as indicators for the solstices or the timing of the rains. In a desert where survival depended on knowing exactly when water and resources would return, tracking seasonal change was not symbolic, it was essential. The geoglyph's location reinforces this interpretation. It sits along an ancient caravan route used by llama caravans, carrying goods between the high Andes and the Pacific coast. Travellers moving through this region would have seen the figure from a distance, its towering form signalling both direction and environmental timing. Some scholars proposed that the giant served as a guardian or guide for these travellers, marking a waypoint in a dangerous and desolate landscape. Its humanoid shape is another aspect of its mystery. While many Atacama geoglyphs depict animals like llamas, birds, and snakes, the Atacama Giant's proportions differ dramatically from everyday imagery. The figure's rectangular head, lacking facial detail, suggests a mask or headdress rather than a literal human face. This aligns with Andean iconography, in which masked or transformed beings symbolized shamans, sky spirits, or intermediaries between the human and supernatural worlds. The figure's long arms and legs also carry symbolic meaning. Andean art often exaggerates limbs to emphasize movement, direction, or cosmic alignment. The giant's raised limb-like projections may correspond to astronomical events or ritual gestures. Some lines near the figure are aligned with the rising of constellations that were significant to Andean agriculture and seasonal planning. Whether or not the giant functioned as an exact solar calendar, its construction clearly involved deep observational knowledge of the sky. Archaeological evidence around the geoglyph includes small stone cairns, remnants of pathways, and signs of ritual offerings. These indicate that the figure was more than a visual marker. It was part of a ceremonial landscape. People likely gathered here for rituals tied to movement, trade, and seasonal transitions. In a desert defined by scarcity, such ceremonies would have reinforced social bonds and spiritual assurance before difficult journeys. The construction technique is simple but effective. Workers remove dark desert stones, leaving pale soil exposed to create contrast visible from great distances. Some parts of the figure include additional stone alignments to reinforce edges. This method allowed ancient builders to create enormous images without altering the landscape beyond its surface. The durability of the desert environment, extreme dryness, scarce vegetation, and minimal erosion preserved the geoglyph for centuries. Yet despite all these clues, the Atacama giant remains partly unexplained. Its exact creators are unknown. Different local cultures practice geoglyph making, and the figure's style does not match any single tradition perfectly. Its precise function, calendar, deity, ritual guide, or symbolic guardian, may have combined multiple roles. As with many ancient designs, its meaning likely evolved over generations, shaped by new needs and shifting beliefs. Modern interpretations often cast the giant as a supernatural figure, an otherworldly presence in an empty land, but its true significance is rooted in human ingenuity. People living in one of the harshest environments on Earth created a marker so large and durable that it continues to dominate the landscape long after their society disappeared. It represents not myth, but adaptation, knowledge, and the ability to use art as a tool for survival. Standing before the Atacama giant today, the silence of the desert amplifies its presence. The figure does not speak, yet its form captures a human attempt to understand the sky, the land, and the cycles that govern both. It is a reminder that ancient cultures expressed their knowledge not only in objects they carried, but in shapes they carved into the world itself, shapes meant to endure long after their makers were gone. The Atacama giant remains one of the clearest expressions of this legacy, a 390-foot symbol etched into the driest desert on Earth, bridging astronomy, ritual, and landscape in a single, enduring figure. The carved stone head of Guatemala. In the dense tropical forests of eastern Guatemala, a photograph surfaced in the mid-20th century showing what appeared to be a massive stone head rising from the jungle floor. The face was smooth, elongated, and strangely serene, and its features did not resemble Mayan sculptures or the artistic traditions of the surrounding region. The image captured immediate attention because, unlike known Mesoamerican carvings, the head showed straight, narrow features more commonly associated with Mediterranean or Middle Eastern sculptures. For decades, this single photograph, poorly documented and surrounded by conflicting testimonies, formed the core of one of Central America's most persistent archaeological mysteries. The earliest known reference to the head came from a Guatemalan landowner who claimed it stood on his private property before the area was overtaken by civil conflict. In the photograph, the carving appears weathered but still intact, with a high forehead, closed lips, and an expression that suggests classical statuary rather than Mesoamerican symbolism. Mayan sculpture typically emphasized broader facial proportions, highly stylized eyes, and elaborate headdresses. The carving in the photo lacked all these elements, making it appear culturally out of place. For years, researchers attempted to locate the sculpture, but the region today bears scars of decades of civil war, deforestation, and land disruption. Several areas that once held archaeological remains were bulldozed or used as improvised barricades. One account suggests that the head was damaged or destroyed by armed groups who repurposed large stones for military cover. Because the object has never been rediscovered, its dimensions, age, and material composition cannot be confirmed. This uncertainty allowed speculation to grow. Some writers suggested that the head might represent a pre-Mayan or unknown civilization, or an artistic experiment influenced by distant cultures. Others proposed more sensational interpretations involving lost travellers or external cultural contact. But without physical evidence, none of these claims can be verified. The photograph itself remains the only surviving record, and its poor quality makes detailed analysis difficult. Archaeologists studying the region note that Guatemala contains thousands of undocumented stone carvings, many eroded, unfinished, or made by local communities over different periods. It is possible that the head belonged to a lesser-known cultural group from the region's long and complex history. The area was inhabited not only by the Maya, but also by earlier peoples whose artistic traditions are less well understood. Some stone sculptures from pre-classic periods show simplified forms or atypical facial proportions, though none match the exact style of the photographed head. Another possibility is that the carving was not ancient at all, but created in the late colonial or early modern period. Local stoneworkers sometimes produced sculptures inspired by European religious imagery, and the photographed head's smooth lines and closed expression resemble classical representations of saints or symbolic figures rather than mythic or ritual imagery from indigenous traditions. If the carving were relatively recent, its stylistic differences would make sense within the hybrid artistic environment that developed after Spanish influence arrived. Yet the context of the photograph complicates this explanation. The stone head appears deeply embedded in soil, with significant weathering and plant growth surrounding the base. The landowner who shared the photo claimed it had stood in the jungle for generations, though such accounts cannot be confirmed. Because no excavation was ever done, the environmental context remains only a visual impression rather than measurable evidence. The mystery of the Guatemala stone head persists less because of what is known and more because of what is missing. Without recovery of the original sculpture, no radiocarbon dating of surrounding materials, no petrographic study of the stone, and no examination of tool marks can be performed. In archaeology, context is everything, and in this case, context has been entirely lost to time, conflict, and erosion. Still, the photograph continues to circulate because it raises important questions about how we interpret isolated artifacts. A single image removed from its historical and geographic background can easily become a canvas for imaginative narratives. But even when stripped of speculation, the stone head remains interesting for what it suggests about Guatemala's layered cultural history. Many ancient traditions existed in the region long before the Maya reached their classical peak, and many artistic styles flourished and vanished without leaving a rich archaeological record. The head, if authentic and ancient, could represent one of these lesser-known traditions, a sculptural expression that survived only as a single weathered monument. If it was modern, it still reflects how syncretic and diverse the artistic practices of the region became over centuries of cultural blending. Either way, the carving offers a reminder of how incomplete our picture of the past remains, especially in areas affected by conflict and environmental change. Today, the carved stone head of Guatemala stands not as evidence of a lost civilization, but as an emblem of archaeology's fragility. Entire histories can be erased by a few decades of upheaval. A monument that once stood in the forest may now lie beneath farmland, rubble, or unmarked soil, leaving behind only a grainy photograph and the memory of a face that does not easily fit the categories we expect. Its mystery endures not because it defies explanation, but because the past surrounding it has been stripped away. What remains is a calm stone face, staring out of a vanished landscape, an uncontextualized remnant of a history we no longer have the tools to fully reconstruct. The Nevado Muela Pyramid. High in the Peruvian Andes, far above the tree line where vegetation thins into wind-cut rock and permanent snowfields, local mountaineers have long spoken of an unusual formation on the slopes of Nevado Muela. From certain angles, especially when the clouds clear and afternoon light strikes the ice, the mountain appears to contain a stepped, pyramid-like structure rising through the snow. Photographs taken by climbers and researchers show a sequence of terraces cut into the mountainside, giving the impression of an enormous construction hidden beneath layers of ice and sliding rock. Unlike other Andean pyramids built in valleys and coastal plains, this one, if artificial, would lie thousands of meters above typical settlement zones. The stepped pattern is striking. Massive horizontal bands appear to climb the mountain in measured intervals, creating the illusion of monumentality on a scale far beyond the known architectural traditions of the region. The symmetry is what draws attention. It resembles the profile of pre-Columbian platforms found in lower altitudes, yet it sits in a place where permanent habitation has never been documented. The structure looks engineered, even intentional, but no archaeological survey has ever been performed due to the mountain's extreme elevation, unstable terrain, and year-round snow. Much of the mystery arises from the geology of the Andes themselves. These mountains contain layered sedimentary formations that can fracture into straight plains, sometimes creating natural terraces that mimic human construction. Erosion, glacial pressure, and freeze-thaw cycles can sharpen these layers into clean horizontal lines. At a distance, or in the right lighting, the result can look like steps carved by deliberate design. Many geologists who have examined available imagery suggest that Nevado Muela's pyramid is likely one of these natural formations, yet dismissing the structure as purely geological ignores the deeper cultural context of the region. High mountains in the Andes were sacred to pre-Hispanic civilizations. The Inca and earlier cultures built shrines, markers, and ceremonial platforms known as huacas at elevations once assumed to be uninhabitable. Archaeological expeditions have uncovered offerings, mummified children, and ritual structures on summits above 6,000 meters. These discoveries show that Andean peoples had the motivation and capability to construct sacred features in extreme environments. Because of this, the idea that a stepped structure might exist at high altitude is not inherently implausible, though its scale would be unprecedented. The terraces on Nevado Muela appear much larger than known Andean high-altitude constructions, resembling features carved into the mountain itself rather than built atop it. If any part of the formation were artificial, it would imply ceremonial activity on a scale far beyond anything previously documented in the high Andes. Local oral traditions add another layer. Communities living in the valleys below describe Nevado Muela as a mountain inhabited by protective spirits. In some stories, the mountain contains stairs for the gods, a phrase often interpreted symbolically, but which aligns visually with the terraced appearance. Whether these stories arose from the visual shape of the mountain or from older ritual meanings is difficult to determine, but they show that the stepped form has long been noticed by people familiar with the region. Satellite imagery provides only limited clarity. Shadows, snow cover, and resolution gaps make it difficult to distinguish between natural strata and human modification. Some researchers argue that the angles are too regular to be entirely natural. Others point out that the Andes contain many mountains with similar layering. Without physical inspection, the debate remains open. The greatest barrier to study is the environment itself. The slopes where the terraces appear are unstable, covered by shifting snowpacks and loose scree. Avalanches are common, and oxygen levels are low enough to make prolonged archaeological work nearly impossible without extensive support. For this reason, the site has never been excavated, mapped, or even visited by a dedicated scientific team. It exists primarily as a visual enigma, photographed from afar, speculated about, but never truly examined. Whether the Nevado Muela pyramid is a geological illusion or a genuine trace of ancient human activity, its presence invites a broader understanding of Andean culture and landscape. If natural, It demonstrates how mountains can create forms that mimic human architecture, reminding us that the natural world often produces shapes that challenge our perception. If human modified, even partially, it would represent one of the most ambitious ritual constructions in the Americas, an attempt to carve meaning into the side of a sacred mountain itself. For now, the evidence is inconclusive. The pyramid remains inaccessible, unstudied, and largely unknown outside mountaineering circles. Its mystery survives because the mountain keeps it hidden beneath layers of snow, ice, and geological time. What stands out is the symbolism, a stepped silhouette rising from a place where the air is thin and the world feels distant. Whether carved by ancient hands or shaped by natural force, the form embodies the Andean relationship with high places, mountains as sacred beings, landscapes as temples, and peaks as thresholds between the human world and the sky. The Nevado Muela pyramid remains just beyond certainty, a monument that may exist only in appearance, yet still carries the weight of mystery written into the contours of the mountain itself.